Jim, you taught deception detection at the FBI. What do you think is most important in detecting a lie?
The first thing is you have to norm the person. Every individual has their own uh, idiolect, that's their own personal dialect, and everyone has their own mannerisms and quirks and ways of communicating when they're speaking normally. If you norm that, if you get to know that, then when you ask questions and they're being deceptive, they're going to experience some kind of changes in verbal, nonverbal, or non-linguistic verbal behaviors. So you have to look at all of that, sort of take it in all at once, and that's how you determine if somebody is under the stress that's usually associated with lying.
hmm And I've heard you speak too about how people, when they're lying, sometimes they'll kind of push others to make decisions if they're trying to get somebody to do something. So
Yeah, like
how can we spot that
overselling.
too?
Yeah, well, overselling.
Yeah.
In other words, instead of just conveying information, they're trying to convince you of the truth of the things that they're saying. The confident people who are telling the truth don't have to convince their listener, they're just simply conveying a fact. But when you have to say, look, I swear on my mother's grave and I really, really mean this, and you can ask all my friends, well, those are all indicators that there's something not right about what they're saying. They're not even buying their own verbiage. They're trying to sell you something rather than convey information.
So there's obviously tons of nuance to detecting deception, and
Hmm.
I've heard you speak about a few categories: perception management, cognitive complexity, and fight or flight cues. Maybe could we
Hmm.
start with perception management? What are some of the
Sure.
elements of that?
Well, people believe that they know what truthful people sound like and what you expect truthful people to act like and sound like. So, what they'll do is they'll feed you what they think you think truthful people do. So, for example, if I'm a person who talks looking around the room and using my hands, I'll be very still and look you right in the eye when I'm lying to you. I'll change the way I behave because I'm trying to manage your perception of me.
Yeah, yeah. Jim, I'm starting to think about something with this too. What if you're dealing with somebody who's a pathological liar? Somebody
Well,
whose norm is to lie.
right. Well, that's what I'm saying. You have to norm that person. So as you get to know them. In other words, for example, parents uh, by the time their kids are teenagers, they know instantly when their kids are lying to them.
Yeah.
They know because they know the child so well, and then they see that change in behavior. Now, if somebody's a pathological liar, there's a spectrum to all this. There's a continuum of behavior. Some people are really extreme and really good at hiding it because this is their norm. But when you drill down on issues, you're going to see, even with pathological liars, you're going to see very prominent changes in behavior because they're going to be questioning whether their lies are working. If you go back and re-ask that question in different ways and come back at a different angles, you have to be at least as sophisticated as the person you're interviewing. You
Yeah.
can't just you can't just think everybody is going to react in the same exact way. But worse than a pathological liar and is a psychopath, and pathological lying is part of being a psychopath, but there are many more nuances to it, like 19 other categories they have to look at. But one of them being a total lack of human empathy. And when the person does not care at all whether or not you think they're a liar, then they have less stress associated with it. So you'll see fewer changes. And you will most likely catch those kind of people in sort of in the inability to keep this thread of detail going through very sophisticated lies. If they're simple lies, how you doing today? I'm all right. You're never going to catch a person in a little white lie like that, there has to be consequence
Yeah.
to the lying for it to produce the stress that really causes the changes. So, again, in law enforcement, well, we're almost always in a stressful situation with the people we're talking to. I mean, there's rarely any instances in which law enforcement is talking to someone and it is just has nothing to do with a stressful situation. Either you're on sort of the bad side of being victimized of a crime, or you're on the bad side of committing a crime. So either one of those can produce stress in the targets of your interview or interrogation, depending on
Yeah.
what you're doing.
Yeah, I think people wake up when law enforcement's involved. I mean, even for me, I know you're retired, but if I had a message from you or something like, oh, that's the FBI guy. I gotta be on top of it.
Well, yeah,
I'm
the
curious,
retired FBI guy. Yeah.
when you sort of checked me a little bit, we had a little call. I'm curious, were you using some of these strategies to assess me?
Well, I have developed over the years the ability to just be passive in that, and really rely on it. I know, first of all, your conscious mind is pretty quick. It thinks in thousands of a second, but your subconscious mind
Mm.
thinks in 200 billionths of a second. So 200 billion calculations are going on in your brain at any given moment, sending all sorts of electrical impulses through your body, controlling all your organs, everything that you're not thinking about. It's your subconscious doing that. It's 200 million times faster than your conscious mind. So if you can actually let all your senses take in data, then you also have confidence in your educated gut. You can assess things, situations, people, 200 million times faster. So I let that happen. If I feel good about somebody when I'm talking to them, I relax about it. If I feel, wait, there's something going on here, I'll probe a little more and I'll pay more attention. But, once you do this for a decade or so, and you go on to 2 or 3 decades of doing it, you start to really have confidence in what your brain can do and what your senses can pick up and how it interprets it. I mean, there's a great book by Gavin de Becker called The Gift of Fear, and it talks about listening to your instincts. I don't know that he attributes it to subconscious thinking, but I'm pretty sure that's what's actually going on. When people are in a very dangerous situation, they're not conscious of their body picking up all this data, but their body sends them a message. The hair stands up in the back of their neck, their arms feel prickly, their stomach is churning, and they don't know why. It's because their subconscious is trying to tell them something. You better be careful. There's danger here.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think it's easy for people to understand that someone like you can have that intuition after decades of experience. But I've heard you cite a story, a case study from that book about a woman who's a nurse and she's just kind of
Hmm.
going out to her car, but has a
Yeah.
sort of superhuman reaction. Could you share that?
Well, she's every day gets off at 3 a.m., goes to her car, and as she's about to put her key in the door to open it up, she gets the hair standing up in the back of her neck. She sticks the key between her fingers, turns around just as the guy's about to jump on her. She hits him in the face or the eye with the key. He runs off. What she didn't do was she didn't consciously notice that she stepped on some very light glass on the ground. That light glass was from the glass bulb that he broke so that her car would be in darkness so that he could hide and attack her. Now, she didn't consciously do that calculation, but subconsciously she did. And so she was able to save herself. And many people who save themselves from literally death defying situations have relied on that. But, people constantly talk about women's intuition or a mother's intuition about her children. And I think most of that is the same exact thing, that they know the child so well or they know the situation so well that their subconscious is telling them things. And I think in general, women are probably more likely to listen to their gut, their instincts, and men are probably socialized away from that, except for homicide detectives. And, and I think that because we had the benefit in the behavioral analysis unit to study human behavior and how the brain works and how radically different people act along a spectrum of human behavior, we get to see thousands of different varieties of it. And so all that stuff is programmed in our brains, and it just helps us pick things out a little easier.
Yeah. Then you talking about behavior and that whole spectrum. I think we'll get into a little bit of the psychopathy checklist. You mentioned 19 other
Okay.
items as we go. Um, with the behavior, we've talked already about how words, things people say can be used in a lie, but it seems behavior can also be masking things too. Like coercive control could be masked as sort of generosity,
Hmm.
kindness. How does someone's behavior that looks nice actually deceive people?
Well, you have to look at the entirety of the behavior. In other words, you can't take individualized things in that arena and say, "Oh, this is bad." Love bombing. This is somebody who just pours on everything. "Oh my God, you've completely changed my life. Oh my God, I can't stop thinking about you." Showering gifts, affection, whatever. Those things, a lot of those things, just are wonderful things. But when you look at the speed with which it happens, when you look at the overwhelming sort of consuming nature of that kind of behavior, and you start seeing, like, looking at the little details underneath the surface, you can typically pick out things that are actually very controlling. And when a person love bombs somebody, and then once they finally kind of get them hooked, you start seeing, oh, well, I'll be there at 9 o'clock. Not, what time do you want me to come? Um, I'll pick you up and take you to work every day. Wow, that's great, amazing, and I'll cook for you. I'll make sure this. I'll
Uh,
pay for that. I'll All these things that, yeah, they sound very nice, but when you actually step back a little bit and look at it, well, this person that's the object of all this love bombing affection, this person is losing freedom and control and autonomy, and many times their friends or their ability to make decisions, and it slowly sort of builds a wall higher and higher and higher around this person, and eventually that person is not free to do anything on their own.
mhm.
So again, it's something that can creep up on people. In other cases, it can be rather rapid and really change somebody's life in a very quick time. Usually, the skill level of the offender is going to determine how long it takes to actually put those kinds of things into effect.
And to ground this in an example too, I think there's a television show that you were involved with where I think it's called "Am I Dating a Serial Killer?"
Yes.
Where there's
Yeah.
a young woman who the guy is doing these things you're talking about. Like it's all in one case. He's paying
Yeah.
for her phone bill. He's driving her to work. What was
Isolating
that?
her. Yeah. Yeah. And he's doing this in increasingly insistent ways. In other words, when she said, "Well, but today I want to," no, 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 we already have plans. You're not going to break the plans. I mean, we'll talk about that some other time. Never getting to it, and constantly doing things that just give him all the insight about what she's doing and where she's doing it and who she's with, and gives her absolutely no control. And that's really, it's it's risky behavior as well as controlling behavior, because the more that you give up control, the more that you sort of allow someone to take that control, the more vulnerable you become. And unfortunately, with a lot of those types of relationships, if the person who's being controlled actually takes steps to break that control, that separation is the most dangerous time.
Yeah, I've had several experts on that sort of thing on the show, and that's been a consistent theme. And you mentioned the word insight too. One thing I'd forgotten was if he pays the phone bill, Then he also sees who she's calling, so he's tracking communications. I mean, the
How
depth of
much
this is
time
huge.
she spends on the phone,
Hmm.
how where she goes, he can track her, have her track
Yeah.
her phone and find my phone or what is it? I can't remember what it's called. Family something. I can't remember
Hmm.
the name of the program, but basically you can track everywhere the phone goes. It's just like having one of those little radio trackers on, and yeah, it's a way for that person to have every bit of information that can keep keep the other person from having their own independent life and relationships. And a lot of times you'll see one of the first things they do is alienate their target from that target's own family and friends.
Hmm.
And yeah, that's a dangerous situation.
Yeah, it seems the isolation can be one thing, and another thing can be sort of an immersion into a group as well. They can just sort of insert you into a social circle where you're busy with those people, and all those people are already kind of a fan club for the
Hmm.
offender, something like that.
Yeah. And you know, every one of them is different, but
Hmm.
they find their own ways and usually with experience they get better and better and better
Yeah.
at doing this. And fortunately, some people are able to get away from it, but unfortunately, then the next victim probably has somebody who's more sophisticated, who's already been able to create situations and knows what works and what doesn't work. And there's a famous you know show on one of the streamers about a guy who's a swindler, and let me say that, but
I want to acknowledge you, Jim. You're so thoughtful about not making celebrity for the offenders and being much more focused on the well-being of the victim. And I
yeah.
find that very admirable. I want to
Well,
call that
I
out.
wish everybody in media would do that because unfortunately, um, for a big segment of the bad people, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for media attention. They're
Yeah.
looking for, it doesn't matter if it's negative,
Yeah.
as long as they get the attention, they think they've won, and it encourages them. So I try not to do that. But in a lot of these cases, the longer it goes on, the more victims they have under their belt, the more sophisticated their behavior becomes, and the harder it is for their victims to get away.
Mhm. Are there good strategies for getting away?
Well, yeah, I mean there are organizations like Laura Richards started a anti-stalking organization in the UK, and she's brought that sort of technology over here. But it, there are organizations that can help, and it's really important um, to be able to connect with somebody that can support you, and to be able to. It's difficult because if you're working, you may have to leave your job. If you may have to leave your phone with any contacts that you may have. You may have to not take a vehicle that person could have tracking devices in, or have access to the GPS information. You have to do a lot of really important things. So it's really important to get some time away to figure out ways to get time away where you can actually make plans with an organization that will help you. There are shelters that will help with that separation. And again, if the person is becomes aware of it, that becomes the bad person becomes aware of it, then that becomes a really dangerous time.
Yeah, and as we're talking about behavior too, one thing that comes up is not only the things that they can track and stuff, but also the emotional triggers that can be pulled. So often, in this phase, there will be some sort of apology or something, but it's really a manipulation. So this is another masking sort of thing. How can somebody appear to be apologizing, but actually trying to manipulate somebody back in?
Well, it's all tied to that whole love bombing thing. I'm doing this for you because I love you. I'm doing this for you. I'm going to take you to work because I love you. I'm going to pay for your phone because I love you. I'm going to pay for that mortgage because I love you. I'm going to make sure that you don't want for anything because I love you. And then, well, I hit you or I shoved you or I screamed at you because I love you. Um, I don't want you to do this because I love you. Nobody else cares about you. And they tie the good things in the beginning and to this love, and then they start tying these controlling things and these hurtful things to that same love. I'm sorry, I just love you so much. I can't help myself when I find out that you're talking to another man, or that you looked at another person, or that the guy who sits next to you at work is a guy. Like, what the hell? Why are you sitting next to a guy? Why aren't you sitting next to a woman? That kind of thing. And, it hurts me so much to know that you are in that position and that guy could hit on you anytime he wants. And my love is so pure and so real. I'm sorry that I have to tell you this, or I have to do this to make sure that you understand my love.
Yeah, well, it sounds when we say it, we can almost joke about it, but I mean the triggers that can be pulled are devastating. There's rationalization in there, there's justification, there's gaslighting, there's distractions. There can be that brandishing of anger or even violence and things like that. Um,
Minimization of what they do,
yeah,
projection of the blame onto the victim. Yeah, all that stuff.
yeah. So one of these cases that I've heard you talk about, and we can maybe branch out into the psychopathy a bit more with this. Um, is the case of Robert Spangler,
Mm,
who, when you get into him and his fourth wife, it sounds so unbelievable. Um,
yeah,
just
very
like this
real.
sort of scenario that we're just talking through. But what was the case with Robert Spangler?
Well, Robert Spangler was actually a genius. He had a genius IQ, and he, in the 70s, married a woman, and they had two kids. And by the time his kids were teenagers, he kind of got bored of the marriage and wanted to get out. He actually left home and started living with a 19-year-old girl, I think, at the time, for a while, for like 6 months. And I don't know if she got tired of him or he got tired of her, but he came back home and decided, he didn't want this marriage anymore. So, like Christmas Eve, he took his wife downstairs, told her to close her eyes because he had a surprise. And then he said, he reached up and picked the gun up off the beam above her head and said, well, I think if she shot herself, she would probably shoot herself here. And then he shot her in the head and then dropped the gun where he thought it would fall. And then he said, no, no, no. First, I went upstairs and took care of the kids. And by that, he meant he went up to his daughter's room and shot her from across the room in the chest, and she died. And the sound woke up his son. So when he got to his son's room, he was up and moving around, and he shot him, but he didn't kill him. So he said he had to figure out another way to kill him. And he figured, what would my wife do? And she'd probably smother him. So he took his pillow and he forced it down on the guy, on his 14-year-old son's face, and smothered him. He said, he fought me, but of course he was no match for me. I mean, just the incredible leakage right there of narcissism is just unbelievable. But what's really more unbelievable is, as he's telling this story, he's holding the hand of wife number four, who's sitting there overwhelmingly in love with him, having been love bombed by this guy. And then at that point, we had told him, the behavioral analysis unit wanted to talk to him and study him, and because he got away with all these murders. And he said, well, he'd tell us about the 1976 murder because there were no more surviving relatives of those people around. So he didn't he wasn't worried about somebody coming after him that way. We told him that we couldn't arrest him. And but we said, look, this is all fascinating, and we're really amazed at your ability to recount this story, and we're learning a lot from you, but it's one incident. It's a triple homicide. It's not serial murder. We thought you were going to tell us about. all these crimes. And he goes, all right, you got your serial. And he tells us about wife two escaping, going to Europe and not coming back from a trip. And then wife three pushing her off the Grand Canyon on their honeymoon. And then wife two coming back to commiserate with him about the fact that everybody he loves keeps dying. And she died of a pill overdose that night. So now, wife four, after he discloses all this, we let him go home. But before that, we take wife four aside and say, listen, he's planning on taking you to the Grand Canyon, right? Yeah. Well, he killed his third wife there. He's going to kill you. Oh, no, 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 no. He loves me. He's changed. He loves me. She held his hand the whole time while he was talking about these. I mean, just completely detached in terms of manner. He's literally just telling the story as if he's reading it off a piece of paper and had no connection to him. And yet she still believed that he loved her. Now, at 3 a.m. that next morning, we busted in his door and we arrested him and we threw him in jail. I mean, we told him we couldn't arrest him, but that wasn't true. We could arrest him, and we did arrest him. He's
Yeah.
confessed to being a serial killer. So there's no statute of limitations on serial murder, on murder, period. So anyway, he was a brilliant guy, but we fed his ego to the max, and he just stopped seeing what was right in front of his face because he felt so good. He felt so empowered. He felt like he was invulnerable because we told him he was.
It's such an amazing story, and that he had the audacity to sort of play the white knight and do safety videos for the Park
Oh yeah,
Service as well.
that was what's amazing. Yeah, after he pushed his wife off and said she slipped, he did safety videos for the National Park Service. He in the videos he's saying yes, and she wanted to take one more picture before we left, and I told her to be careful, and she must have slipped on some loose gravel as she was stepping backwards, and I was fiddling with something on the camera, and then I looked up and she was gone, and I ran to the edge, and I almost fell over myself. Again, it's all about him. So he did that because to him, I mean, that's his way of reliving this murder and sort of throwing it in the face of law enforcement. He told he had staged the first triple murder as a murder suicide by his wife, and he staged the third one as an accident, and then the second one as an accidental overdose or intentional. Oh no, he staged it as an intentional because he tacked a thumbtack note onto the door of the room where his second wife was staying when she came back, and I'm sorry, but my brain is not functioning right this early in the morning. But I'm trying to think of what he said. It was in the notes. She reportedly said, I hate doing this to you, but I can't live anymore, or something like that. Uh, Again, about him, because that's why people kill themselves because they're concerned about him. Not it has nothing to do with their own lives, but he made it about him again.
Mhm.
So that's glaringly obvious to when you step back and look at these things together. But in the individual situations, he was so distraught when he came home from the movies and found his wife had killed herself and their two kids. He was so distraught when his third wife fell off the Grand Canyon. He was so calm and convincingly, caring about his second wife who'd come back and then died of an overdose. And I think at some point he also wrote a letter to the family members of one of his wives that he had killed. Basically rubbing their faces in it. In a, this is just his way of reliving and sort of gloating about what he got away with.
But Jim, you said that Robert Spangler was a genius. Was he also, max on the psychopathy checklist, 40 out of
Oh
40?
yeah, absolutely through the
Yeah.
roof. He was up there. Yeah. He didn't the thing he didn't have, he didn't get 40 actually. He actually had never violated probation, but that's because he hadn't been caught for those earlier
Yeah.
crimes. I mean, he had been committing those crimes for years and should have been arrested the minute he came home from the movies after he's killed his wife and two kids. There was absolutely no indication that his wife had been suicidal or homicidal. And yet he was so convincing that law enforcement at the time said, "Oh, yeah, blame it on the woman. Go ahead. Yeah, that's easy. Let's just do that." And that was really short sighted because unfortunately, other people lost their lives because of that. And in fact, he was the number one suspect when he was, I think, 9 or 10 years old, when one of his classmates, who he had a conflict with, um, accidentally drowned in I think it was a water treatment plant. No reason for that kid to have been in there, and he was questioned. He was the only suspect questioned at the time, and but they didn't have enough proof, so he
But
got
Jim,
away with it.
this psychopathy checklist thing, some people, they look it up, they want to kind of be amateur detectives. Um, is there something in there that you think is particularly useful for people who are trying to kind of screen the people around them?
Yeah, I think it is useful. There's also the DASH risk assessment model that Laura Richards put together,
Yeah.
DASH, and that's for domestic violence situations. Now police use that when they're assessing a situation when they get a call to a domestic violence complaint. I think both of them have very comprehensive list of things that you should look out for. Uh, Unfortunately, psychopaths are pretty good at masking
Yeah.
things, but they're also fun to be around, and because they love excitement and energy and doing things and having sycophants. They love that stuff. It feeds their ego. But if you're in a position to where you can sort of step back and actually assess that person as opposed to being so close to that person that you're sort of swept up in all the hoopla. If you're at that distance and you can do that, you should be able to see to recognize the risk there. Now, not every psychopath is violent. I mean, there's a whole category we call CEO psychopaths who rise up to the top of their professions because they don't give a damn about anybody else. That lack of empathy allows them to get away with things in their own mind that the average person just wouldn't do. Yeah, I know if I take this move that 8 people are going to lose their job. Well, they deserve it. So I can go up, that thing, which a lot of CEOs. I think there's some glaring example of one out there these days that doesn't could not it did not compute that doing things that resulted in thousands or tens of thousands of people losing their jobs could actually blow back and put negative heat on this person. Why? Why? Because they just don't think that way. There is no computation of the personal losses that may be being suffered because that's just not a component of their lives. The smart ones see it in other people and can mimic it, and that those are the dangerous ones because then they're more convincing and they're not as transparently self-centered.
Yeah. So one thing that I don't see on at least the PCLR, Robert Hare's psychopathy checklist is the need for control. And yet that seems so much a part of the sort of criminals that we're talking about. Um, Do you see that as a defining characteristic or something that maybe only comes out in the violent offenders?
Well, I mean, I think that it's it's sort of in the penumbras
Okay.
of the checklist, right?
Yeah.
It happens because of the control is not usually blatant, and but yet when all of the other things, when you look at the, manipulation is in there. I mean, that's a controlling feature, right? Um, and keeping somebody, you know, well, off your trail by being a pathological liar. You're doing things that actually control other people. But I've never actually asked Dr. Hare about that, but that's a really good point you bring up. Maybe he needs to add one. Maybe it should be 21.
You could propose that. I'll
Okay.
leave it to the experts.
Well, I mean, maybe he wants to come on your show,
That would be
and
fun.
he'll talk to you about it.
That'd be fun. So with all this, there seem to be so many slippery things with people who are just abnormal, with the psychopaths, with those with narcissistic personality disorder. You talked a little bit about the case of Robert Spangler and sort of feeding his narcissism to get a confession out. What do you do to get the truth out of someone who will lie?
Well, the most critical step in doing an investigative interview is building rapport.
Mhm.
And it is a natural fact that when you make a human connection with someone else, it's more difficult for that person to deceive you. If it's a way to bring the person on your side rather than uh, being in the midst of a confrontation that you may never, ever win. Because the more you push the build, the bigger the wall that they build is going to be. And I ran into this in Guantanamo Bay when I went down there to assess their interviews, interview and interrogation program, and found out that they were treating the detainees horrifically, going to the point of torturing them in their interrogation plans. It was like, no wonder you're not getting any information. You have these people who are battle hardened, who have been trained, who grew up in very difficult circumstances, who have been trained to hate you for being the cause of every bad thing that happened in their lives, and you're doing bad things to them. I mean, it only reinforces that. But if you actually undermine those expectations and treat them with dignity and respect as fellow human beings, they just don't really know how to act. They can't fall back on that hatred, and it starts to wear down everything that they've been trained to think about you if you actually treat them like a person. And I took some time and taught them in Guantanamo how to do that. Many of them just ignored it at the direction of the general at the time, uh, but eventually they changed their manuals and they don't do that anymore.
Yeah. It seems very much in the interest of just getting an accurate confession too. I mean, if you read the work of someone like Robert J. Lifton or people in the cult space and things, you'll find
Mm,
that if you push people hard, they'll give a wild confession. They'll just
mm,
say anything to stop the pain. Um,
right.
so it
And
seems,
they'll say what they expect. That's managing
yeah.
perception. What they think you expect
Mhm.
to stop the pain. Yeah, exactly. There's never been a study that shows that that's going to get you accurate and reliable information. However, rapport building, there are plenty of studies that show that prove that.
For those of us who will never get to interview a serial killer, what is that like? Is it like in the movies and TV where you put away your gun and you go in and you're alone with this guy in a room and they take off his cuffs and it's all dramatic, or is it more at a distance?
Well, we have this program in the behavioral analysis unit in our research division where we went out. The original profilers interviewed, I think, 38 or, yeah, I think 38 serial offenders that had been incarcerated. And by the time I left, I think the number was about 1,500 that we had interviewed. And so, in the middle of doing cases, we would go out and do these interviews, and they varied from person to person, and from from facility to facility. These are incarcerated offenders, and many of them are in supermax, and those are pretty harsh conditions. And and well, there are some who are eager after years of being in prison, knowing that they'll never get out. They're eager to tell their stories.
Mhm.
One, because they're bored to death in this cage, and they want some, I don't know, excitement in their life. Two, they some of them want to relive those experiences. I mean, they're still very much entrenched in that mindset, and we have to sort of put up with allowing that to happen so that we can get accurate and reliable information from them and do what we do to try to prevent future offenders from getting away with it. So I've definitely been in the room with guys who, I mean, made my skin crawl, and I had to, sort of be neutral and relaxed and very kind and open and gentle with them. And there are other guys that are, somewhat, at least outwardly remorseful, and they want to understand why they felt this way. So it's sort of a back and forth. Other guys who who I think were misinterpreted by the system based on maybe the crime they were convicted of versus what was really going on, and what was thought to be their mindset versus what really was operating in their brain. And
Mhm.
so some of them wanted to get that out. And I had one very interesting interview with a woman who it was thought only facilitated her husband in sexually victimizing her daughter, but in fact she was the driving force, and she looked for partners who would be okay with that kind of behavior. And again, feeding her ego, she was also a real narcissist, and just totally lost sight of what she was saying because I was feeding her ego so much. And then of course after the interview, which was supposed to be an exit interview as she was being released, she was rearrested and prosecuted for the other things that she just confessed to. So, you know, it's it's a very it's a very dynamic situation. Let me
Mhm.
put it that way,
Yeah.
because I mean, if you want to know, if you want to see the best, the most accurate, the most cringeworthy depiction of it, I think Mindhunter series
Mhm.
is really well done. Some of the offenders and the interviews, I have to hand it to John Douglas and Charlize Theron for putting that together, because they really captured Kemper. I mean, and just what
Oh,
it's
that
like.
actor who does him is marvelous.
Unbelievably good.
Yeah.
Yeah, unbelievably good. And just the size and the threat that just his presence
Mhm.
presents is just, he did that so well.
Mhm.
And and I also spent some time with Anthony Hopkins, and I had to ask him. I said, where did you get that? Where did it come from?" And he said, my wife asked me that same question." I said, "Man, it would be very difficult for me to be in the same room with you
Mm.
and vulnerable, it's having seen your performances." But yeah, it's a very dynamic situation. You have to be prepared for anything, but you also have to seem as though you're just a blank slate. You're not pushing any kind of agenda. You're really trying to get information. You're not judging. And it was fascinating. It was fascinating, but in a very sick, demented way. It's kind of, I'm sure, all of us from that unit have we've seen the worst that humans do to one another, and it's disconcerting.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah,
It seems,
it makes you leery about a lot of things.
yeah. It seems when we become aware of all this, the question comes up, is it nature? Is it nurture? Or are these guys just sort of born that way? I've heard you talk about biopsychosocial dynamic.
Yes,
What's that model
it's
for understanding this?
it's nature and nurture and psychology and personality. It's all of that. It's not one or the other, and you have to have the genetic potentiality. In other words, people are given, your genetics allow you to be capable of many things.
Mhm.
Are they going to all express? No, absolutely not. But there's a certain limit within those genetics, right? But then you have your psychology and your personality, which are the filters through which you experience nurture or experiences in life, socialization, all that stuff gets filtered through your own personality and psychology. And the way you participate in that is through the thousands and thousands of decisions that you make in the privacy of your own brain. And that starts from probably the moment you're a thinking individual, and you make decisions when you're a little baby, and you learn from the experiences and the training that you get, and the maybe the punishments, and those punishments can push you further to the dark side or have you make a decision to go to the light side, whichever. But I always say the genetics loads the gun, personality and psychology aim it, and your experiences pull the trigger. I mean, it's that perfect storm of all three of these things that creates a serial killer or a serial offender, and it can also, individual crime acts can be caused by all that as well. But if you are careful as you grow, you can avoid things that might turn you loose, doing really bad things. But if you don't care, and if it's all about you, and if it's all, and if you have no human empathy, it's very easy to find ways to step on everybody else to get yourself higher. And if you make the decision when you're young to sort of embrace other people and think about them and not just be self-centered and narcissistic, then you can fight bad things that might be in your genes and not have them express. You can sort of look at the horrific way that you've been treated and say, you know, I'm not going to do that to my kids. Or you can say, I deserved better. I'm going to make everyone pay for it, you know? And those are personal decisions that are made. And that's why people are responsible criminally for their actions, because it is a result of decisions they make.
Yeah, it seems this sort of habit model. You're sort of building your character with your habits, with your behaviors over time.
Yeah. And even it doesn't even have to rise to the level of behavior. It's thoughts. I
Mm.
mean, it can be that and fantasies and then they can express as bad behaviors.
Yeah, it's something that I've read about a little in your novel, where you got expert witnesses and things, and talking about how the fantasy can sort of prime the behavior, and also changing the fantasy can even be a way to maybe break out of it for offenders. Jim, you have grown up in a family of people who stand up to crime.
Mm.
What is your family's background in all of this?
Well, yeah, my brother Tim was also an FBI agent and a cop before that, and in our company, XG Productions, we're mainly staffed by former law enforcement and three-letter agency people and military people. My father was in the Army; he was an intelligence officer, um, but his family, uh, you know, his grandfather came over from Italy, and his father, and he started a construction company in the Bronx, and had a um, uh, like a construction slash equipment slash dump yard in the Bronx as well, and he built a lot of really amazing buildings in the city. Build a bunch of Fordham buildings and Columbia Law School and NYU uh, and the Manhattan County Courthouse and a couple of the tunnels and bridges that he worked on. But when he was doing one project, my grandfather was supposedly accidentally electrocuted, and my father's brother, my uncle Guy, took over the company, and literally a month later, he was accidentally run over by a bulldozer, and these mob guys took over the company. And my grandfather and my uncle, they weren't playing with the mob. They weren't they did not want to do that stuff, and they lost their lives. And I think, I didn't know that when I was very young, but I think when we were teenagers, my father set us down and told us about that. And I think we have a very, um, I don't know, deep-seated desire to see justice rather than to see that kind of thing happen. Um, my father went to law school on the GI Bill because his father was killed on the day he was traveling back from the Korean War, and he never got to see him. Um, and he went to law school to sue to get the company back, and by the time he did win that lawsuit, they had sold off all the assets, and he got like a pittance for what it was worth. But we still have all those sort of monuments to the work they did.
Mm.
These amazing granite buildings. In fact, this past year, Fordham University celebrated 100 years of the gym, and it was these big, huge blocks of granite. And the football team, the Fordham's front line, was called the Seven Blocks of Granite, named after that building. And there were a couple of very famous football players. Who was the coach? He became the coach of Notre Dame. Um, I can't remember his name right now. Uh, but just some really amazing football players. But it's so cool that their name derived from the building that he built, which was the largest indoor athletic complex in the country at the time he built it. So now it's tiny in comparison to the big stadiums they have at universities, but it's still in use today, which is pretty cool. 100 years later.
So, Jim, we're talking about your family. Now, you mentioned your brother in the FBI as well. It was your other brother who kind of spurred you with your personal case as well?
Well, yeah, actually, yeah. My When I was a prosecutor, my older brother called me and said, "Hey, now that you're a prosecutor, we should go after the director of the camp we were at." And I was like, "Why?" And he said, "Because one day when nobody else was around, I snuck into his office and I found 3 paper bags filled with Polaroid pictures of him molesting boys." And I was like, "Oh my God, I thought I was the only one." And so the next day, he and I both went to the FBI and told them what happened, and then sort of I got more involved at that point in the investigation. As a prosecutor, it was really a tough situation for me because I was so afraid at the time that anybody that I knew or that I worked with would find out what had happened to me, because you kind of work hard to sort of overcome it. But what you're really doing is just hiding it. And there's still this overwhelming feeling of shame and embarrassment and guilt. And it takes a long time and a lot of therapy or or introspection to realize the shame and the guilt belongs on the shoulders of the person who did this to you. And I know a lot of people who are victimized say, my offender. And I try to get them to stop saying my offender because that offender has no right to your life.
Hmm.
They have no real connection to you. They committed a crime against you. It's the person who committed a crime against you. It's the offender who committed crimes against you. And that's how you should couch it, just because it's the first step in not feeling like there are any rights on the part of this person to you and your life and a long-term effect on your life. So when there's no connection there, it's easier to separate. So anyway, yeah, my brother Peter, he really helped in a lot of ways because had he not made that call, I never would have gone to the FBI and I never would have gone after the guy. And he probably would have continued to keep offending year after year after year. He actually taught at 13 different Catholic schools over 23 years. He was a Boy Scout leader. He was a basketball coach. He was, he got jobs handing out towels in kids' locker rooms over the summer, so he could get access to kids. He did everything he possibly could. And, had it not been for my brother making that call, not only would this guy not have been locked up, but at the end of the case, after he did get locked up, I got recruited into the FBI. I would never have become an FBI agent had it not been for that call from my brother.
I do wonder, though, about
All right.
the insane coincidence of you taking your paperwork to Fordham and running into this, right?
It blew me away. I
Yeah.
mean, I literally just had the night before, the day before, my boss had come into my office and said, "You never filed your paperwork with the bar." And, you have 18 months from the time you pass the bar. When you're a prosecutor for the city of New York, you get 18 months before you have to file your paperwork. You don't have to go through the normal thing and do that before you can try cases. You can try cases day one after you pass the bar. So that was a really, tough moment for me because she said, "You have to do this or you're going to lose your job." And I'm like, I didn't do it because I didn't want to. It's like all this background. You have to list every place you ever lived or worked in your life. And I didn't want to list the camp.
Mhm.
So I didn't want him to know where I was or what I was doing. And so I finally that night, like, you know, get over it. That's a decade ago. Why are you even worried about this? You know, you're just being childish about it. And so I fill out the form and I go to walk it into my law school, and he's the guy sitting behind the desk in the registrar's office. I couldn't believe it. I had just convinced myself I was never going to see this guy again. He had nothing to do with my life, and he's sitting there right next to the alumni files. It was the most tumultuous thing that ever happened to me in my life. I could not believe, I couldn't reconcile what I had just convinced myself of and what was happening in reality. And, he would say later on recordings, because I had to wear a wire and meet with him again. He would say later, "I didn't know if you were going to jump over the desk and strangle me or just sit there and cry." And those were the things that were going through my mind. So you can tell this guy was attuned. He knew he knew how to read people and he knew how to target his victims. And so it's the kind of thing where that was another watershed moment, but it was something that I never in a million years could have anticipated. I mean, it sounds fictional, but it's not. And it changed the course of the investigation because up until that point they couldn't find anyone who would admit that they were victimized by him. Everybody was just as afraid of him and afraid of coming forward that they denied it. But once I got the recordings of him, we were able to arrest him, and then people started coming forward, which was great.
Well, Jim, before I ask my last question, for people who want to follow along with you, your incredible story, your work, where should people look for you online?
Well, I'm at Real Jim Clemente on Instagram, on Audible. I and XG Productions, we have about 25 titles of documentary series that span the spectrum. Most of them are related to crime, but there's also a little lighter side of crime in Am I Dating a Serial Killer, and sports and crime, as well as one I wrote, a audio play. They call it an audio book in Audible, but it's called Bluebeard, and it's about the first serial killer in L.A. and it's a wild ride. It's a great performance by Joseph Fiennes and Karen David and Holt McElhaney from Mindhunter and Adrian Pashdar. They're great actors, and they did amazing performances. It's a really it's my favorite thing that I've ever written, and I wrote it with Pete McDonald. But it's something that I'm really proud of. So you know, that should keep you busy for a little while because there's many hours of stuff on Audible that you can listen to.
Yes, you got a lot of work to be proud of, and we'll
Thank
put some
you.
links in the description for people to check out. And Jim, my last question is, what's it been like for you to tell your story and to put it all out?
Well, at first, when I first wrote it down, there's no way I had any inkling at all that I would ever, or desire at all that I would ever publish it, because I did it sort of as a therapeutic exercise. And I think it's important to do because once you write it down physically, your story, it's now, sort of finite and manageable. I mean, before it was this horrible theoretical thing that I thought would be devastating if it ever got out. And now it's not. And I can put it in perspective. And I think that's a really good therapeutic exercise for anybody who's gone through anything like that. But being able to tell my story and having people respond in the way they have, and that almost every time, in fact, I will say every time I've talked about my story, people have come forward to me and said, it happened to me too. And it's a far more common thing than people realize because unfortunately society kind of suppresses the desire to talk about these things because of stigmas attached to it and myths and really hurtful things that people think about it. But and it's also the way people, even in law enforcement and politics, talk about sexual victimization of children. It's destroyed their soul. It's killed, murdered their soul. It's destroyed their lives. People who have been victimized hear that, and people who will be victimized hear that, and it tells them that there's no hope. Well, that's bullshit. There is hope, and there's millions of us who are surviving and doing great and in great relationships and having wonderful lives. And that's the truth of it. You don't have to be that dramatic about it to say that it's a very bad crime and it should be punished severely. That's, given, but you can't go out there and destroy the hope of the people that have gone through it by saying things like that. They really need to stop that. And one other thing I'll say just before I go is that they should also stop calling offenders monster predators because it throws people off because 95 or 93 or 95% of the victims are victimized by somebody they know. Some of them people they know and love and trust. And to call them monster predators, everybody thinks, oh, I'll be able to recognize that person and be able to protect myself or stay away. It's just not true. These people, they're a nice guy, acquaintance offenders, pillar of the community offenders, people in positions of authority and control and access that have access to children, and they are not, the guy lurking behind, the tree at the schoolyard. They're people who are in positions of power in the school. They're people who are positions of power in any youth serving organization. Those organizations will draw, they are target rich environments. They will draw people who want to take advantage of kids to them. So just be careful and don't mislead yourself with those kind of misleading labels.
Mhm. Well, Jim, like you said before, going through something, but defining your character, that's so much what you're talking about here, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share this with us and with me. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Brad, and good luck.
Thank you. To help raise awareness about narcissistic abuse, please share this video. It helps a lot.